a panel on misinformation to now a fireside chat on the importance of education. This is why we need us here. College attainment has helped Latinx community members close significant gaps in recent decades, including the wealth and income gap, and opening pathways for upward mobility. The COVID-19 pandemic has posed a risk to higher education attainment, with enrollment declining during the pandemic. This fireside chat will provide insight into college enrollment and attainment, as well as some of the obstacles and opportunities that exist to support Latinx students across the nation. To begin our chat, please welcome the Assistant Vice President of Strategic Advancement, Arizona State University, Dulce Vasquez. Yes, and the President and CEO, Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, Dr. Antonio R. Flores. Yes. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. I know it's a long afternoon and we need some cafecito, so we are following up this disinformation panel, and I think education is one of the best ways to combat misinformation, so I think this is perfectly placed. As you heard here, our main speaker today, Dr. Antonio Flores, CEO, Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, or we call it HACU, where he has led the organization since 1996. HACU was founded in 1986 with 18 members, and now you have over 500 members in 38 states. And one of the most recent additions to an HSI designation, Hispanic Serving Institution, was Arizona State University, where I work. So thank you. Well, I want to start off. People always talk, the old adage, which I heard from my abuelito, is education. That's the one thing that can't be taken away from us, right? It's the greatest equalizer, and our parents have always said that. How true is that for the Latino community?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of the program. And last night, I heard, going back to your question in a moment, the word that kept coming up during last night's reception was empowerment. And I think your question is connected to that particular term. And I'm really glad that we were preceded by the panel that discussed the issue of social media and media issues in general. Because at the end of the day, it boils down to the same issue of empowerment. And empowerment, in my mind, can be earned and can be sustained primarily through education. Because obviously knowledge is power. And so in that sense, it is the great equalizer in our society. And obviously one goes to college to get a degree, to get some skills that you can then use in the workforce. But more than anything else, we go to college to get critical thinking skills, so that all this business of misinformation and so forth, we can ourselves, as part of society, discern and discard what we know is false, and obviously follow our best thoughts and ideas on how we are going to utilize the information we get. And so, but it is a great equalizer, not just in terms of that particular issue of how to deal with misinformation, but more importantly, how to become part of the leadership of this country. And for that, higher education, it is a prerequisite. I mean, if you look at the main leaders in our society, whether in government, corporations, foundations, you name it, professionals in all fields, they all have that in common. A very, very important higher education that allow them to become what they have become. And so that's no different for us. And so, yes, to your point, higher education in particular is the great equalizer in our society. And that's why the Hispanic Association of College Universities' mission is to champion Hispanic success in higher education. And we've been doing that for the last 35 years, almost 36, with great success, I must say. And here I want to take the advantage of having the mic to also advance a little commercial, because we're having for the first time in person the last 3 years, our annual conference in San Diego, October 8 to the 10th, where we showcase all the best practices that our college universities are developing and carrying out to make sure that Latinos and Latinas succeed at much higher rates in getting college degrees and entering the labor force successfully. That's where we really have some of the brightest and some of the best new developments in higher education that are helping Latinos. And so that's kind of a long answer to your question, but
No, that's a great answer to my question. So I think something else that we've heard about both yesterday and today, and in our actual event description for this conversation, we talked about education as a means for closing the wealth and the wage gap for Latinos. But we've also heard that irrespective of our level of education, the Latino community still has some of the widest gaps. What will it take to change this?
well, it will take every one of us. It takes the whole village of Latinos across the country and others that are not Latinos that believe in the fact that the future of this nation is going to rest more and more on the shoulders and in the minds of Latinos and Latinas. And so all those gaps that we know exist, whether it's graduation from high school, entrance to college, graduation from college, and so forth, and our representation rates in high-need professions or fields like STEM and so forth, all of them relate to the issue of getting an education, and that has continually improved over the last 20 years. Okay, so we were much worse than we are today, but we are going to be much better in a few more years because we're going to make it happen. Okay, and so what it's going to take is for us, as not just the Hispanic Association of College Universities, but the more than 500 Hispanic serving institutions across the nation, to really make a big push for not only change in practice at the local level where they operate, because they can do a lot more with K-12 districts that we have come to define as Hispanic serving school districts, to make sure that those high schools, those middle schools, and even those elementary schools get the benefit of collaboration with HSIs, and that they get the benefit in a variety of ways. And that's already happening, but we are going to make it happen even in bigger ways, so that Haku established an office to push that type of collaboration between HSIs and Hispanic serving school districts more than 15 years ago. Based on the excellent evidence that we have of the work done to date, we have developed a major bill that is now in Congress that we call the HERE Act, the Hispanic Education Resources and Empowerment Act. And it is to really provide more support for that effort and scale it up nationally. And so we'll get there, but it's going to take a very, very concerted effort on the part of all of us. And in this regard, I would like to point out that the reason I'm here in this forum is because a few months ago, I had a conversation virtually with some of our friends in the Ford Foundation, whom I applaud for supporting this effort. And I learned something that shocked me. I learned from them that today, only 1% of all the philanthropic money in this country is going to Latino-run organizations. 1%. I mean, and of course they added, we are doing much better. We're doing 3%. Okay, which is commendable, but it's unacceptable. Okay? And it reminded me when I was back in Michigan many years ago, the head of the Kellogg Foundation invited me to a meeting there at the Kellogg Foundation, Norm Brown, I think it was his name. And I remember they were talking about Latinos getting more than 3% of the money back then. So instead of moving forward, we shrank. So that's unacceptable. So again, we're going to need foundations to get in the ballgame with respect to education. And we're going to need corporate America to invest, because at the end of the day, they are the main beneficiaries of a highly trained workforce that they need.
So I want to go into something that you said on multiple levels about backsliding a bit. Going back to wages, Justice for Migrant Women is giving out, we all got t-shirts that showcase that Latina Pay Day this year is December 8th, which, as I remember, has been moving further back over the last 3 years. But over the last 3 years, we've also been dealing with COVID. And I'm sure many of us in this room have struggled. We've had family members struggle, and that's been particularly difficult for our college-age students. They're sort of in their formidable years of education and critical thinking and being in very unique circumstances and spaces. What have been some of the consequences, not just for our students, but also for our institutions? Because not ours, but we've seen declining enrollment over the last 3 years.
Right. Yeah, obviously, COVID has been a tremendously negative force in society globally, not just in the U.S. And obviously, the most vulnerable populations suffer the most. In our case, in higher education, there was a shrinkage of about 11% altogether in enrollment.
Not us.
No, Hispanics, I have to say that it was interesting how, in our case, we lost about 7%. Okay? And the reason we
I meant at Arizona State. We grew.
Yeah, well, some grew, and that's why we didn't shrink more, because some actually grew. And actually, at the graduate level, there was growth, even during the pandemic. We lost mainly in community colleges. Is where we lost, and is where about 52% of the Latinos start college. So that's why we lost about 7%. But obviously, the impact also affected institutions, and we lost some HSIs who actually closed down. Some in California, some in other places, especially those that were most vulnerable because they were dependent on enrollment and tuition, private institutions that were HSIs. And so we are now
and that's
in
a macro issue.
Excuse me?
That's a macro issue. There are lots of institutions.
A lot of institutions. So, okay, so that's all of that is obviously on the negative end of the equation. On the positive end, because we have to learn to find the good and the bad. And what is the silver lining of the pandemic? Well, number one, that we learned that we are very resilient. Otherwise, it would have been a lot worse, okay? So we had to shift. And right at the beginning of all of the turmoil of the pandemic, from in-person teaching to online. And a lot of our institutions obviously were not prepared to do that. So there was a lot of struggle to get to the point where they could be sustainable for the most part. And most of them survived, okay? Obviously, I was happy that Congress came up with major investments for a lot of things in society, including higher education, to sustain those institutions. And so we learned that we are very resilient, creative, innovative, and nimble, that we can, in the split of a second, move from where we are to where we need to be. And that happened. And so we have learned about ourselves too, that we are able to not only survive, but often thrive, like in the case of your institution, okay? And so I think the best years, of course, are ahead of us. And all the learning that has taken place throughout the pandemic is gonna help us to do even better in the years ahead than we were doing already. But we lost about 250,000 students, Latinos and Latinas, out of the 3.8 million that were there in 2019. Yet, I hope that in the next couple of years, we'll get back to at least 3.8 and then move up. And so, obviously, right now, we're dealing with issues of mental health in a big way with many of our young people and their families. And our HSIs are doing the best they can with the money they got to provide some of those resources so that they are becoming more and more community service centers than they were before. They also have learned to do more of that and to do it better.
So how do we help get that 7% re-enrolled in school?
Well, in three ways, seems to me. One, we need to keep pushing very hard for the K-12 system to increase its success rate with help from our HSIs and from other sources so that we get many more Latinos to not just finish high school, but be ready to tackle college level courses without the problems of having to take remedial education and so forth. And that is really one of the main things, because you see states like California, for example, 55% of the K-12 enrollment, in fact 56, is Latino in K-12. Texas is about the same, 55%, and many other major states are in the same track, whether it's New York, Florida, Illinois, Colorado, et cetera. They all are moving in that direction. And so we have a great demographic force coming up, and we're going to make it happen mainly because of that fact. But we have to help young people get better prepared to go into college. Secondly, we have to really help our HSIs become increasingly better institutions with more investments and capacity building wise, because they are way behind the curve when it comes to federal funding, for example. They only get about 68 cents for every dollar that goes to the rest of the field per student annually. That's unacceptable because they are educating the bulk of the needy students. So the needier are getting less support. That's unacceptable. And we've been fighting that fight for a long time, and we're getting somewhere, but we're not where we need to be. And so creating more capacity for HSIs to not just accept more students, but to get them through college degrees, but especially in fields where our presence is even less, like STEM fields or the professions, is absolutely essential. So they need to invest more. And when I say they, I mean not only Congress, but the states and corporate America needs to get into the ballgame. And the philanthropic community, they all have a role to play. And the third thing is that we obviously need to be much more effective, and I'm talking about our own association and others who believe in what we're doing, and persuading and educating the public at large about the importance of our community for the future of this nation. Because most of the new workers joining the American labor force are Hispanic.
1 in 4 Gen Z are Latino.
Yeah, and then in the last decade, more than half of the population growth in the entire nation was Latino. And so the future of the nation rests on the backs, but more importantly, on the minds of Latinos. And we have to educate them accordingly.
And the success of those minds.
Right. So again, the third point is we need to get the public at large and policymakers and foundations and corporations to understand that their own future depends on how well we educate Latinos going forward.
So what kind of networks has Haku been building with those types of organizations in order to help students succeed?
Well, we have a number of partners now in the corporate community, including some of the major technology companies. We also are beginning to work in areas where we know it's critical that our institutions and our students succeed, such as clean energies, for example, which is part of the STEM kind of spectrum, but we need to focus more on that. We already have relationships with that industry as well. We have, of course, relationships with diverse corporations. Where we have not really done well, and that's our fault. Or maybe it's a two-way street, but I want to say it is our fault with the philanthropic community. We are not there with foundations, okay? And we need to change that quickly, dramatically, and in a substantive way. Just before I came into this session, I had the opportunity to meet Anne-Marie from the Latinos or Hispanics in Philanthropy. And I think that we're going to work together to make sure that we change all of that, and with our friends in the Ford Foundation as well. We need to really dramatically change that sad state of affairs, that only 1% of all the philanthropic money is going to Latino-run organizations. And so it's going to be an all-out effort, and we're ready to do it. We're ready to do it. We have a tremendous network of institutions, number one, more than 500, and the network of corporate partners, and in government we have partners as well, and federal agencies. We, for the first time, have two caucuses in Congress, one in the Senate, one in the House, advocating for Hispanic serving institutions, co-chaired by Latino elected officials there. And so that's a major accomplishment right there, that we are now officially in Congress with Senate Hispanic Caucus, or HSI Caucus, I should say, and one in the House. The one in the Senate is chaired by Senators Padilla and Menendez. In the House, there are four co-chairs, Castro, Grijalva from Arizona, Diaz-Balart from Florida, and the representative from Puerto Rico. So we have a tremendous opportunity to really expand those networks and make them work for our community, and especially for higher education success of the Latino community.
This is a multifaceted question about technology. So we had to rely a lot on technology during the pandemic. We had a ton of students, both at the undergraduate level, but also the K through 12, that didn't have the hardware or even the connectivity to keep up with classes. So how has technology either hurt or helped the Latino community? And the second part of this is, when you think about technology, and I think about some of the colleges and universities that have closed down during the pandemic due to lacking enrollment, and our capacity as a country to be able to build more spaces, like physical spaces within institutions, how can technology help aid in some of those?
Well, obviously we know that technology is a pervasive fact of life across the board, not just in education, and everything that we do. So we need to make sure that going forward, the college universities that we represent are adequately equipped to use technology to improve programs, to offer more opportunities, and to really excel in the areas where we are least represented, namely STEM. You mentioned those fields. But we also need to make sure that the companies that run the show commit themselves to helping our community to get more connected, and not just connecting them, but we need to also make sure that they use technology for purposes that will help their children and their youth to get a better education. And of course, it's just inescapable that technology is going to continue to drive change in our society and our economy, in all areas of life, and certainly in the workforce. And so the more we learn as far as the uses of technology and how our community needs to avail itself of them, the better off we're going to be. So we embrace technology, okay? We have no choice. We have to embrace technology, but we have to do it mindful of the fact that too many people are not accessing in the right ways the content that they need to access online, and that there is no systematic effort underway to ensure that they do. And so we have to empower those K-12 schools, community-based organizations to do the type of work at the community level so that we change the paradigm. Otherwise, the lagging that we are experiencing now behind the rest of society with respect to technology is going to increase.
Do you think the stigma behind online education, and particularly in the Latino community, has subsided because of the recognizing that you can learn through digital means through the pandemic?
Well, if you are not thoroughly familiar with technology, you are going to be fearful of using it. And if you don't have the latest technology and connectivity to really use it well, you're going to struggle to really succeed in using technology for learning purposes. And so we have to tackle those issues of having access to the right technology and programs that will help them use it right. But I think the stigma that you're referring to was probably something that affected society at large. People felt that, and many still feel that technology has been a bad thing for many. And in my mind, technology is just tools that you use right or you don't. And of course, my sense is that as we are able to help our young people to get more into STEM fields, which are heavily driven by technology, we'll be in much better shape. And but I agree with some of the criticism about the overuses of technology. Okay, because there are overuses of technology in all aspects of our economy, including higher education. I think they overuse it in some respects that they shouldn't. To me, education is not just about learning some skills and about applying them to a job. Education has to be a process of linking up with the rest of society in a personal way, in a social way. And if you don't have those personal interactions in a campus setting or otherwise, then obviously you have an incomplete education, because you may know a lot about the skills set that are needed for a job, but you know nothing about how to get along with other people. And to me, that's a major issue with the overuses of technology, that it could lead to a more and more alienated society.
So we've got just 2 more minutes, but I want to make sure some of the biggest news in education and students was last week's announcement by the White House that they canceled up to $20,000 of student debt. And some of the reports I saw, up to 50% of Latino student debt is going to be erased. How does that affect? Yes, we cheer for that. We cheer for that. We cheer for that. How will that impact our graduates and our students right now?
Well, obviously, it's going to be a great experience for everyone who owes money in terms of student loans, to not have to worry about another big payment every month. And I think it's the right thing to do, because unfortunately, my recollection of how this all began goes back to the Reagan years, when President Reagan came on board, and then he started talking about higher education being more of a personal luxury, privilege, and not a social good. And then they shifted gears, and the Pell Grant shrank compared to, and then the loan programs began to emerge. The states follow suit, and a lot of states began to cut budgets for higher education. And then they told the universities, well, you can just increase tuition and put other fees behind it to make up for what we're not giving you. And of course, who's going to pay? The students and their families. And that to me was a disgraceful policy. But yet, now we're pushing back. But it's going to take a lot of time to really get to the point where we were in the 1970s, when financial aid was very different from the way it is today, and the cost of a college education actually was much lower. And so for Latinos and Latinas, and for every student who owes money, is a great thing. And of course, some wanted that all of the money all be raised. To me, that would have been the wrong approach. I'm glad they put that means test of if only those who, and then for the Pell Grant recipients is double the amount that they can.
20,000.
So I think it's great. And
Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much for sticking with us. Dr. Flores, thank you for being here.
thank you for listening.